And this is how my family finally shattered. My father slapped my mother, hard, right in the middle of dinner, just because she said no to giving my brother 47 grand for another failed car business. And my brother, he clapped. He laughed. And I just sat there, watching until I couldn't anymore. That night, I stood up. I made one call. And when the doorknob turned, everything they built on silence started to fall apart. But what broke me wasn't just the violence. It was the years we all spent pretending it wasn't there. So tell me, what would you do if your family turned on the only person who ever protected you? Would you stay quiet, or would you finally say, enough? My name is Alden, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one, the youngest son, the one who doesn't stir the pot, the one who bites his tongue so the room doesn't explode. That's how it's always been in this house. Tonight, something felt different, not louder, not obvious, just wrong. Like the silence was too measured, too tight. You could feel it in the air before the first word was spoken, the kind of tension that doesn't hum, it hisses. We were all sitting at the dinner table in my parents' home in Houston. It was early evening, the kind of southern December night where the air is chilly, but the house feels like it's been trapping heat and memories for 20 years. My mother, Maricela, moved quietly between the kitchen and the dining room, her hand trembling slightly as she placed a platter of roast chicken down. I saw it, that little tremor, but no one else looked up. Typical. Near her chair, a blue cleaning cloth was neatly folded, always there, like her, useful, silent, easily overlooked. My father, Rick, had already poured himself a second whiskey before the salad hit the table. My older brother Royce was all swagger, talking about some flashy new car he test drove. A Lexus, I think. No, maybe a Tesla. It didn't matter. It was the way he said it, like the world owed him luxury. I'm 34. I pay my own way. Got my own place in the city, steady job in logistics. No wife, no kids, no applause. Around here, that makes me disposable furniture. Dad always ran the table like a boardroom. Royce was his golden boy, and I was, what, the leftover? The one nobody counted unless something broke and needed fixing. But tonight, the rhythm was off. Dad was drinking faster. Royce was louder. Mom was quieter, shrinking into her chair with every brag that left Royce's mouth. Then it happened. Royce leaned back, as casual as someone asking for the salt. Found the car, black exterior, tan leather interior, fully loaded. It's only like 47 grand. He looked at Dad. Right? Dad nodded without blinking. Reasonable. Then Royce turned to Mom. So, you'll wire it tomorrow, right? Dad said you would. That moment, that single sentence, punched the air out of the room. My mother froze. Her fork hung in midair like she forgot what eating was. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just said one word. No. The table went still. I swear, even the dog in the next room stopped moving. The silence was so thick, it felt like it had mass. Royce laughed. Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic. It's just money. You sit on the accounts all day anyway. I looked at my father. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the tile. His hand shot out, and the slap echoed, hard, violent. My mother's head snapped to the side. The silverware clattered. Royce, he clapped. One single, amused clap. Like he just watched a good scene in a bad sitcom. And that was it. That was the rope snapping. Quietly. No yelling. No warning. Just done. I looked down and saw the blue cloth on the floor. It had fallen from the table when my mother stumbled back. It looked like it didn't belong there anymore, like she didn't belong at this table. That's when something shifted in me. I'd spent my whole life explaining my father's anger away. He's just old school. That's just how he was raised. He doesn't mean it. I told myself staying silent was how I protected her, but silence only ever protected him. I didn't feel rage, not in the way people expect it. I felt something colder. My hands went numb. My mind sharpened like glass. I stood. The chair nearly tipped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. They didn't even look at me. My father was back in his seat, chewing like nothing happened. Royce was sipping his drink. I made a call. One number. A call I should have made years ago. A call I was too scared to make until now. I didn't say who I called. Not then. Let them eat. I locked eyes with my father. He didn't flinch. Royce raised an eyebrow, but neither of them had a clue. Not until the doorknob started to turn. I didn't sit back down. Instead, I watched their faces carefully, waiting for the storm I had summoned to arrive. My father's voice cut through the tension first. "Sit down," he said, not raising his tone, not even looking at me, just flat and commanding. It was the same voice I remembered from when I was 12, 17, 25. A voice that didn't allow questions. A voice that expected obedience. But I stayed standing. That silence I gave him, that wordless defiance, it unsettled him more than if I'd screamed. His eyes flicked up, narrowing just a little. That was all. But in this house, even that flicker was a shift in power. My mother still hadn't moved much. She was touching her cheek, gently, as if she were afraid even her own skin would betray her. But she wasn't crying. That somehow hurt more. I realized then that she had probably stopped crying years ago. And not because it didn't hurt, but because what was the point? Royce leaned back in his chair like this was just another game. "You're really gonna blow this up, huh?" he said. "Come on, man. It's not that deep. You're acting like this is some kind of scandal." I didn't answer. "Seriously, Alden," he went on, "you're always so soft. No wonder nobody takes you seriously. You're like a placeholder." That word hit something old in me. Placeholder. Like I'd been just filling space until someone useful came along. He smirked, probably thinking he'd shut me up. He always thought that. What he didn't know was that this time I wasn't swallowing it. I looked at my mother again, still frozen, still distant. I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. A long time ago, maybe I was 15, I'd come home late after football practice. I passed the laundry room and saw her in there alone, folding towels like she was trying to stay invisible. She had a long-sleeved shirt on, even though it was humid. I saw the sleeve shift as she reached up, and there it was, a bruise, dark and ugly, blooming just below her elbow. She noticed me looking and pulled the sleeve down fast. I stepped inside and asked if she was okay. She just smiled, tight-lipped. "Don't say anything," she whispered. "Please. Your father, he didn't mean to." I asked why she stayed. She looked right at me, then said something I'll never forget. "Because you boys deserve stability." Back then, I thought it made sense. Now I realized she didn't mean stability. She meant survival. What she really said that day was, "Because fear is easier than change." That memory hit harder than any slap I'd ever seen in this house. I came back to the present to hear my father's voice again, this time directed at her. "Maricela," he said, voice tight with authority. "Apologize to Royce. You embarrassed him in front of the family." My mother turned slightly. Her shoulders folded inward like she was preparing to say it. just out of muscle, memory, just because that's how things had always gone. No, I said, stepping forward. Both of them turned toward me. She doesn't have to say anything. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't loud, but it was the first time I'd ever said anything to my father that didn't come from fear. Royce stood up, knocking his chair backward. His grin was gone. You really think this is about you now? He snapped. You think you're the hero? He got close, real close, face inches from mine. I've earned that money. Dad promised me. He said he'd help. My whole life, I've done everything right. And you were always just extra. You don't matter, Alden. You never did. That sentence hit me in the chest harder than anything my father had ever thrown. Not the violence, not the control, but the erasure. The idea that I was never seen at all. My mother moved as if to step between us, her hand reaching for Royce's shoulder, but my father grabbed her wrist and pulled her back. I watched it happen in slow motion, another silent subtraction of her power. Royce kept going, like this was his big finale. You've always been invisible. You're the reason nobody expects anything from the quiet one. You're not built for this family. Something in me slowed, not because I was at peace, but because I was no longer confused. It was like the floor I'd been standing on my whole life finally disappeared, and instead of falling, I found footing. I looked at Royce. I looked at my father. Then I looked at my mother, who was still being held back, her expression carved in resignation. They had written the script. They had cast me as the quiet one, the useless one, the one who wouldn't speak, and I had followed it for too long. But that version of me, he was gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, I understood something. I wasn't afraid of losing them anymore. I was afraid of losing myself. I turned toward the front door. It was still closed, but I could feel the energy shift. The knock was coming. I'd made the call. The wheels were in motion. And while they argued about who mattered most, I heard the first sound that told me everything was about to change. It was a distant knock at first, barely there, but enough to make my father's voice falter mid-sentence. He was still mid-rant about respect and family hierarchy when the sound came, a flat, dull thud from the front door. Just once, but the kind that cuts through a room like a pin dropped in church. Everyone froze. Royce stopped talking, his smirk hanging like a bad joke no one laughed at. My mother flinched. Her eyes went wide, not with hope, but with fear. That knock didn't signal help to her. It was danger, exposure, a neighbor, someone from the outside world who might see what we'd spent years pretending wasn't happening. But I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't the cavalry. Not yet. But it was coming. And the weight of what I had set in motion started to settle on my shoulders, not as regret, but as responsibility. My father stood slowly, stiff like a man unsure if the floor under him was stable, but the performance snapped back into place almost instantly. "Stay seated," he ordered, sharp as ever, pointing a finger as if he still ruled the house like a warden. He marched toward the door, chest puffed like he was about to greet the president, not face consequences. That was his survival skill. Control the moment before it controls you. I watched the back of him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the child told to mind his tone, or the teenager punished for speaking truth too plainly. I saw a man trying to hold together a throne made of sand. He had survived so long, not because he was stronger, but because we believed he was. that belief. It was dying. As he reached the door, my thoughts flickered back to another time, years ago. It had been after a particularly loud night. I was 20. Home from college for a weekend I already regretted. I heard yelling. Something breaking. Then silence. I came downstairs and found my mother in the kitchen, wiping a red dish towel over and over across the same clean plate. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I stepped closer. "Did he hit you?" She didn't answer at first, but her sleeve shifted just enough for me to see the dark mark on her upper arm. "I'm calling the police," I said, voice shaking with fury I didn't know what to do with. She grabbed my hand, not hard, not angry, desperate. "If you call them now, they'll never stop coming," she whispered, "and he'll never forgive you." I didn't understand then, but I canceled the call. I convinced myself she needed more time. I told myself silence was protection. But that night etched a scar I'd carried quietly ever since. Tonight, I finally broke that cycle. Back in the present, the doorknob turned. My father's hand hesitated. I noticed a tremble, barely noticeable, but it was there. The first real sign of fear I had ever seen in him. He opened the door, but it wasn't what they all expected. Not the police, not yet. It was Mrs. Halverson. She lived 2 doors down, a retired librarian with thin white hair and a habit of watering her porch plants too late in the evening. She held a casserole dish with foil over it, clearly an excuse. "I heard some shouting," she said gently, eyes flicking from my father to the room behind him. "Everything okay over here?" My father's transformation was instant. His face lit up in the warmest, most practiced smile. "Oh, nothing to worry about. Just a bit of a family disagreement. You know how it goes." Royce appeared at his side, smiling, nodding along like this was all so silly. "Oh yeah, just one of those passionate discussions," he added. "We get loud sometimes." My mother sat at the table, still and ghost-like. I stood behind her, arms crossed. "We're good, Mrs. Halverson," my father said again, reassuring. "But thank you for checking in. So kind." She lingered a second too long, eyes scanning my mother, then me. I wondered what she saw, and what she chose not to say. She handed over the dish. "Thought you might like this. Leftover from my book club night." "Thank you," my father said smoothly. "Very thoughtful." He closed the door gently, turning back toward us with a different face now, the one that cracked at the seams. "You let the damn noise carry outside," he snapped, tossing the casserole onto the kitchen counter. "You want the whole neighborhood thinking we're some kind of circus?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch. Then, evenly, I said, "She won't be the one coming next." That landed. Royce blinked. My father's jaw twitched. My mother turned her head slowly toward me. There was something new in her expression. Not shock, not fear, recognition. She understood. I had made the call she had once begged me not to. They sat in it for a moment, the weight of it hanging over the room like thick smoke. But this wasn't the fire, just the warning signs. The knock we heard was just a ripple. The wave, that was still building. Royce tried to break the tension with a laugh, loud and forced. "You're bluffing. You've always been too scared to actually follow through." But his eyes gave him away. My father opened his mouth, probably to say something about loyalty or family pride or whatever script he always pulled from when his throne started shaking. But even he looked different now. He could feel it. The foundation was cracking. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of being outcast. not of being the black sheep. What scared me now was the idea of letting it all slide again, of pretending this was normal. And when the second knock came, it wasn't gentle at all. It hit the door hard enough to rattle the frame, and this time my father didn't move. For a man who spent his life stomping through every room like he owned the floorboards, the stillness in him now felt almost surreal. The knock hadn't just shaken the wood, it had shifted something deeper in him, in the house, in all of us. Royce's arms dropped from their usual crossed position. His smirk dissolved before he could catch it. My mother, still seated, still silent, reached out and gripped the back of the chair in front of her. Not for balance, for something to hold on to. I stayed where I was, my body tight, but my thoughts calm. I'd made the call, and this, whatever was about to come through that door, was the result. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. "Don't say a word," my father growled. It was meant to be a command, but the edge wasn't sharp anymore. It cracked halfway through, like a splintered stick still trying to hold weight. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw it, what I had never dared to see before. His authority had always relied on one thing: silence. Ours. Not his strength, not his righteousness, just the fact that no one ever challenged him out loud. Tonight, that silence was gone. Royce tried to pick up where my father dropped off. He chuckled, half-hearted. "You really called someone? What, trying to be a hero now?" His voice cracked too. I didn't answer. And that silence, that calm, deliberate refusal to explain myself, was more unnerving to him than anything I could have said. He looked at our dad like he was waiting for a cue, but none came. The power balance had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider anymore. The doorknob turned. The pause before it fully opened was just long enough for every breath in the room to hold. Then the door swung wide. 2 uniformed officers stood there. One was tall and lean, early 40s maybe, the other younger but alert. Both held that posture cops get when they don't yet know if this is a calm conversation or a full report. "We got a call about a disturbance," the older one said. Also had a neighbor call in. Said there was yelling. My father stepped forward fast, almost too fast. "Gentlemen, I can explain. Just a family disagreement. Nothing criminal. We're all fine here." The smile he wore didn't reach his eyes. It was that same mask he'd worn every Sunday at church, every neighborhood barbecue, every time someone might notice the cracks behind the curtain. Royce nodded from behind him. "He's right. Just a heated conversation. Got a little loud, that's all." They made it look easy. 2 men slipping into roles like jackets. Polite, pleasant, presentable. The officers looked at both of them, then to me, then to my mother. The younger officer turned to her directly. "Ma'am, are you okay? Were you hurt?" Her lips parted. Nothing came out. It wasn't hesitation from confusion. It was muscle, memory, decades of keeping the peace, of swallowing bruises behind forced smiles, of saying, "I'm fine," even when she wasn't. I stepped forward, not fast, not confrontational, just enough to interrupt the weight of that silence from swallowing the room again. "I need to speak with you," I said clearly, firmly. The officers looked at each other. The older one nodded. "Of course." I was just opening my mouth again when Royce beat me to it. "He's the one who got aggressive," Royce said, suddenly louder. "My dad was trying to calm him down, and he snapped." He pointed at me, the gesture sharp like a knife. He's always had a chip on his shoulder, jealous of me. of how close we are with our Father. This is just him, lashing out. I blinked. I don't even remember turning my head, but the sting landed like a punch, not because it was new, because he said it so easily, so confidently, like he'd practiced it. The officer shifted, not alarmed, but uncertain. Now there were two stories on the table. I looked at Royce, looked at the man who had watched our mother get hit and clapped like it was entertainment, and then I did the thing they never expected me to do. I spoke. He slapped her, at this table, so hard the forks jumped. The younger officer turned to look at my mother again. She said no, just once, and he hit her. Royce laughed. I stepped aside, motioning toward the floor. She fell right there. That cloth, I pointed at the blue rag near the leg of her chair, was in her hand when she stumbled. She dropped it, trying to catch herself. My voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't angry, but because anger had evolved into something sharper, clearer, truth. For the first time, it belonged to me, not tucked into a bedroom wall, not whispered behind a locked door, out loud, present. My father snapped back into the moment, roaring, "That's a lie!" He stepped toward me, fists clenched, but the older officer moved in instantly. "Sir, step back." The command came calm but firm, and my father, for the first time in his life, obeyed without question. His mouth twisted, ready to spit more rage, but it died in his throat. Royce looked at the officers, then at me, and took a full step back. The kind of step you take when you're not sure who's holding the weight anymore. And just like that, the foundation cracked. They've never had to answer to anyone stronger than fear, I thought, until now. The older officer looked at all of us. I need everyone to separate. We're going to take statements, one at a time. My father barked, "This is my house!" "Sir," the younger one cut in, "that's not a request." Royce opened his mouth, maybe to protest, but my father's silence shut him up. I didn't argue. I nodded once and turned down the hallway. As I passed the kitchen, I saw my mother glance toward me, not with panic, not even with hope, with something steadier, something like belief. And as I walked down that hallway, I realized this was the moment everything I had buried was about to rise to the surface. As I continued down the hallway, the voices behind me dulled to a low murmur. Just the officers separating statements, my father's protesting tone sharp as broken glass, Royce's voice slick with confidence, my mother barely audible. I turned the corner into the small guest hallway, the one that ran past the utility closet and ended at the spare bedroom door. I stopped. The air was still. No windows open, no vents buzzing. Just silence, and the thud of my heartbeat. My hands were steady, but the rest of me? That was another story. The adrenaline had stopped carrying me. All that was left now was everything I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. I leaned my back against the wall. It was cool, and the drywall felt strangely comforting, like I needed something solid, unmoving, to keep myself from sinking into the floor. I wasn't afraid of the officers. That wasn't it. I was afraid of everything this moment was forcing me to remember. It started small, just flashes. Being 13, hearing my mother whispering behind a door I wasn't supposed to open, her voice cracking mid-sentence. The quiet apology at the breakfast table the next day when she told me she'd fallen off a step stool. Then 24, sitting across from her at a diner off Route 40, me begging her to leave him. Her stirring her coffee for so long the cream curdled. "He's not all bad," she had said. "At least we're not alone." Not alone. That stuck. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the weight pressing against my chest. I didn't cry, but I felt the shame. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that says, you waited too long. You protected yourself while she was bleeding alone in silence. I slid down the wall, landing on the bench that sat below a dusty framed print. Some beach scene my mom had bought from a flea market 20 years ago. It tilted slightly to the left. I sat there, hunched forward, elbows on my knees, forehead in my hands. That's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound jolted me. Not because it was loud, but because it didn't belong. In this heavy moment, the sharp buzz felt almost like an intrusion from a different life. I pulled the phone out. A missed call. Voicemail. The name made my stomach twist. Julie, Outreach Advocate. Months ago, maybe longer, I had emailed her after I found her contact on a support forum. I never followed through. I ghosted the number after one panicked late-night message. She must have saved it anyway. I hit play. Her voice was calm, steady, no pressure in it. Hi, Alden. If you still need help, we've got a safe bed open tonight. No questions. Just text us back or call. We'll handle the rest. I froze. I had tried. I had wanted to help. But back then, I was still trying to fix things without confrontation, trying to save her quietly so I wouldn't have to shatter everything else. But that's the thing with silence. It never saves. It only buries. I let the message play again and again. I didn't cry. Not really. But something cracked open. Something about hearing that voice from the past, the version of me that had tried, even if I failed, hit me harder than all the yelling in the other room. Then the sound of voices rose again. Royce. I'm telling you, officer, he said, way louder than necessary. Alden has a temper. He's just not stable. He's always been bitter about how close Dad and I are. This whole thing, it's about him, not my mom. I stiffened. I wasn't close enough to see him, but I could hear the smoothness in his voice. It was like listening to a politician defend a scandal. Calm, practiced, smug. And the officer didn't cut him off. He asked questions. Has Alden ever acted out before? More lies, more poison. That somehow hurt more than the slap, more than the guilt. It was personal now. Royce wasn't just trying to deflect. He was shaping a narrative, one he knew I'd be too tired to fight if I stayed quiet just a little longer. He was banking on the old Alden showing up, the one who backed down, but he miscalculated. This is who they are when they think I can't hear them, I thought. That one line, the thought of it, woke me up like cold water. I stopped rationalizing. I stopped thinking maybe things hadn't been as bad as I remembered. I saw it clearly. My father used his fists. Royce used shame. My mother used silence to survive. And me? I used avoidance, all dressed up as politeness. Not anymore. I looked down the hallway. Through the sliver of open door, I could see the edge of the kitchen floor. And on it, the blue cloth my mother had dropped. It was still there, untouched. That simple, stained rag hit me harder than anything else. She always cleaned. After every fight, every insult, every bruise, she scrubbed it out like it was a stain that could be erased. But this time, it stayed where it landed. And I finally understood. I wasn't the one ruining the family. I was the only one trying to save it from the truth no one else wanted to face. Footsteps approached. I stood before they reached me. An officer rounded the corner and stopped when he saw me upright. Sir, we'll need your full statement now. I nodded once. My voice didn't shake this time. As I followed him back toward the living room, I let myself feel everything. Not to drown in it, but to stand taller because of it. I wouldn't shrink. I wouldn't soften the truth. And I wouldn't protect anyone who didn't deserve it. "This ends tonight," I whispered inside. I followed the officer back into the living room, my steps steady despite the emotional storm still spinning inside me. The room looked almost ordinary now, like any other suburban home after a long dinner, except this wasn't ordinary. Nothing about this house had ever been. He gestured for me to sit on the couch, across from where another officer waited with a small notebook balanced on his knee. I took my seat, settling into the cushions that had once been safe places when I was small, before I knew what safety should have meant. "Whenever you're ready," the officer said, voice low, measured, kind even. I nodded once and began. I didn't rush. I didn't skim the surface. I didn't soften it to make anyone else more comfortable. I told him about the slap, the one from earlier tonight, yes, but also the ones no one ever saw. The verbal swipes, the emotional digs, the humiliation served at the dinner table like a second helping of mashed potatoes. He took notes carefully, eyes steady, no judgment. And as I kept talking, something strange happened. For the first time in my life, someone was actually listening to me, and not waiting to correct, deflect, or deny. My words weren't being twisted midair. They just landed. That realization hit harder than I expected. I paused. "You all right?" the officer asked, tone unchanged. "Yeah," I said, even though I wasn't sure. "Just not used to being heard." He gave a small nod, then asked gently, "Has this happened before? The violence?" "Yes," I answered. "Has your mother ever been physically hurt?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because speaking it made it permanent. "Yes," I said finally, "but most of it wasn't bruises. Not the kind you see." He gave me space, let the silence linger. "Have you ever feared for her safety?" "All the time," I said, barely above a whisper. "What about your own?" That one stopped me. I'd never put it in those terms before. I'd never allowed myself to. Because fear, real fear, made it too real. But I looked at him and said the truth. I didn't fear what he'd do to me physically. I feared what he was turning me into by being around him. And even that small confession cracked something open. The officer didn't flinch. He wrote it down with the same calm he'd shown all night. Just as I started to exhale, the room exploded. Royce barreled in through the side hallway, ignoring the officer's shout to stay where he was. "This is insane," he barked. "You're just sitting here feeding them lies, trying to destroy everything Mom worked so hard to hold together." The officer stood between us immediately, arm outstretched to keep Royce back. "You're acting," Royce shouted over the officer's shoulder, jabbing a finger at me. "You always were the weakest one, and now you're turning on us because you're bitter." I stood. Not aggressively, not to fight, just to face him eye to eye. "You think yelling makes something true?" I said, voice low. "It never has." He blinked. The force he expected to meet wasn't there. No rage, no desperation, just a mirror he hadn't planned on facing. And for the first time, Royce didn't know what to do. "Step back," the officer repeated to him. "Now." Royce looked to our father, who wasn't in the room yet, then back at me. But the fight had drained from his shoulders. He turned and left, his heels heavy against the wood floor. The officer offered me an apology. "You don't need to apologize," I said. "That's just how it's always been." He scribbled a note down, nodded thoughtfully. "That moment, just now, it reinforces your account, his behavior." I felt something shift deep in my chest. It wasn't joy, not exactly, but it was something stronger than doubt, something steady. Just then, my father walked in. He wasn't yelling. No fists, no raised voice. Just a calm, almost composed expression. His shirt sleeves were rolled neatly, and his hands folded in front of him like a pastor about to offer a blessing. "Officers," he said smoothly, "I wonder if I might clarify some of what you've heard." They glanced at me, then back at him. "Go ahead, sir." He smiled like it hurt him to do it. "There's been a lot of tension in this family for years. My son has struggled with resentment. He tends to dramatize." I stayed seated. He continued, "What happened tonight was a mistake. I lost my temper, yes, but I never meant harm. And now he's trying to turn it into a federal case? Come on, this is a private matter." Then he looked directly at me. "You're really going to send your own father to jail? Over one bad moment?" The weight of those words landed, not because they were true, but because I'd once believed them, but not tonight. "You didn't make one mistake," I said, voice calm. "You made a life out of them." He flinched, just slightly, but enough. The officers watched. One of them wrote that down. "You've got it wrong, Alden," he said, lower now. "You always have." "No," I said, still seated. "I finally got it right." He opened his mouth to protest, but the officer cut in. "Sir, we'll need to speak to your wife privately, and we'll need photographs of any injury she may have sustained." That stopped him cold. All the smoothness dropped from his face like a cracked mask. "She's not hurt," he snapped. "That's for us to determine," the officer said, firm now. "I knew it," he muttered, voice rising. "You're all turning on me. You too?" he shouted at me. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He stormed out of the room, muttering, blaming. One of the officers turned to me. His tone softened. "Your mother's going to need you close. Don't leave the house yet." I nodded. For once, I wasn't the scared son watching from the corner. I was steady. I was the person she'd look for when it was time to tell the truth. And when my mother finally stepped out of the kitchen, her eyes told me everything was about to shift again. She didn't walk fast. She didn't speak right away. One hand hovered near her cheek, not quite touching the swelling, but the gesture was enough. She moved like someone who had spent a lifetime making herself smaller. But this time, something in the way she carried herself was different. I didn't reach for her. I didn't have to. I stood a few steps behind her, close enough to let her feel my presence, far enough to let her own voice come first. The living room fell silent, even the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears. Royce had stopped pacing. My father stood near the window, his arms folded across his chest, his jaw working. The officers, both standing now, gave her their full attention. "Ma'am," one said gently, "would you mind answering a few questions?" She looked toward me for the briefest second. I didn't move, just gave a slight nod. Nothing that told her what to say, just that I'd be there, no matter what she said. Her voice, when it came, was thin. There was a misunderstanding. I felt the breath catch in my throat. She went on, barely above a whisper. "He lost his temper. It's happened before, but it wasn't. He didn't mean it. He just..." I closed my eyes. Not because I was disappointed in her, but because I knew this pattern too well. The denial, the shrinking, the attempt to smooth over the cracks before the floor caved in. And for a second, I was 13 again, pressing my ear to a closed door, begging the silence to mean things were okay. But then, she stopped. The officer didn't push. He just waited. And she turned her head again, slowly, and looked right at me. We held that moment. I didn't blink. I didn't mouth a word. I just stood there, letting her see that this time, she wasn't alone. Her shoulders lifted with a deep breath, not steady, but stronger. She looked back at the officers and said, clear enough for everyone to hear, "He hit me." No one moved. Her voice didn't tremble this time. "He has hit me before, and I didn't say anything because I was scared." My father took one step forward. "That's not true." Royce's eyes widened. "Mom," he muttered, disbelief dripping off him like sweat. "You'd betray Dad like that?" "I'm not betraying anyone," she said, louder now. "I'm telling the truth." And that's when Royce snapped. "Shut up!" he roared, lunging toward her. The room exploded into chaos. One officer grabbed his arm, the other shoved between him and my mother. I moved faster than I thought I could, stepping up, voice sharp as glass. "Don't you ever go near her again." Royce fought the hold for half a second, then backed down, but his eyes, wide with rage, didn't leave me. "You're tearing this family apart," he hissed. "No," I said quietly. "We've been broken for years. You just liked pretending we weren't." They dragged him back across the room, holding him there. My father didn't move during the outburst. Instead, he took a slow step forward. His tone shifted. Cold, calculating. "She's tired. She's not thinking clearly. You're all letting her talk herself into a disaster." Then he turned toward me. "And you," he spat, "you've been planting seeds for this for years, filling her head with nonsense, turning her against her own family." I didn't speak. I just stared, because his words weren't for the officers. They were for her. They always were. He turned back to her. "You've let him poison you. He doesn't understand what real families do. They stay together. They forgive." I clenched my fists at my sides, not because I wanted to hit him, but because I needed something to anchor myself, to keep from being dragged back into his vortex of guilt and confusion. And then, something slipped. His voice rose, but not with anger, with desperation. "I could have taken everything from you years ago," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't make me finish what I started." That line, intended to be a threat, a reminder of his control, had the opposite effect. The room froze again, but this time, differently. The officers stiffened. One of them stepped closer. "Sir, are you suggesting financial control over your wife?" He blinked, realizing what he'd said. But the damage was done. I saw it in their eyes. This wasn't just about a slap or a bruised face anymore. This was bigger. Coercion, hidden threats, power plays that stretched beyond bruises. "Step back, sir," the officer ordered. My father didn't obey at first. Then, slowly, he stepped away. "Ma'am," the other officer said, "do you feel safe with him in the house?" My mother didn't answer right away. She looked at him. This man she'd shared decades with, endured behind drawn curtains, protected in front of neighbors. Her lips trembled, but then she nodded. That small motion carried more weight than any word. One officer jotted something down. The other whispered into his radio. I stood there, heart pounding. Not from victory. There was no victory in this. Just a deep ache that it had taken this long. "We'll need to separate everyone for the remainder of the evening," the officer said, his tone now strictly procedural. "Temporary protective measures will be initiated. Ma'am, would you be comfortable giving your statement in another room?" She nodded again. "I'll walk with you," I said, voice soft. "No," one officer stepped in. "Let us handle this part. She needs space to speak freely. I understood. As they guided her toward the hallway, past the remnants of a life we'd all pretended was normal, my father muttered under his breath, "Traitor." Royce glared like I'd burned down the house myself, but I didn't look at them. I watched my mother. And in that moment, standing alone in the living room, I felt something settle into place. I finally stepped into the role they never expected me to claim, and I didn't step back. I stayed planted in the middle of that living room, my feet solid on the hardwood floor. Behind me, the hallway had already swallowed my mother and the officers. In front of me stood the two men who had kept this house under a kind of spell for decades. The room used to feel like home. Now it felt like a waiting room before judgment, tight, charged, dangerous. No one spoke at first. My father glared like I'd just rewritten the rules of gravity. Royce kept pacing, his breathing jagged, his fists opening and closing like he was trying to squeeze the air into something solid. Then my father stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You really think they're going to protect her forever?" he said, voice low, almost amused. "You think they'll believe some aging woman over me?" I didn't flinch. Royce chimed in, bitter as ever. "You just burned this family to the ground. You proud of that?" I looked between them and said, without raising my voice, "I didn't ruin anything. You did." They didn't like that answer. My father took another step. "You're playing a game you don't understand, son. Once this reaches the wrong people, we all lose." There was something in his tone, not anger, fear, and not the fear of arrest. It was deeper, like he had more to hide. That's when I knew. I slowly pulled out my phone. "I've been recording since the officers arrived," I said. "But that's not the important part." Both of them froze. I opened the smart home app and tapped the file icon. "Earlier, when you started gaslighting her again, I triggered the system." My father's lips parted, but no words came out. "This house records audio when you use certain commands. I synced everything to the cloud." I turned up the volume and hit play. His voice filled the room, cold and clear. "I could have taken everything from you years ago." And then, a second later, "Don't make me finish what I started." Royce's face drained of color. My father didn't move. It was quiet except for their own words playing back at them. Unedited, undeniable. That silence didn't last. Royce shouted and lunged straight at me, reaching for my phone. But I was ready. I moved, just a step to the side, nothing dramatic, and he barreled past me, crashing into the coffee table. The thud of his body hitting wood and glass cracked through the room like a rifle shot. A lamp tipped, rolled, and shattered against the floor. "You're dead!" he screamed, scrambling up. "No," I said flatly. "You just made that easier for them to believe." I saw my father go for the phone next, but I was already 2 steps ahead. "You can try," I said, backing up as he grabbed it. "But it's too late. It's all in the cloud." He froze, phone still in hand. That was it. The man who had ruled this house like a king was afraid. His hand shook slightly. He didn't know what to do next. That's when the officers came back in. Their eyes swept the room, saw Royce panning, red-faced, one hand bleeding from a shard of glass. Saw the phone in my father's hand, my calm posture, the tipped-over furniture. "What happened?" one asked. Royce pointed at me immediately. "He attacked me. He shoved me first." But no one moved to cuff me, because I wasn't shouting. I wasn't sweating. I was still. "He tried to take the phone," I said, after I told him it had evidence of threats. evidence of coercion, and he tried to destroy it. One of the officers narrowed his eyes. Evidence? Voice recordings, I said, legally obtained. Royce snapped again. You can't do that. I looked at the officers. Texas is a one-party consent state. Look it up. They already knew. The other officer stepped toward my father. Sir, I need you to hand me that phone. He did, reluctantly, slowly, like he was passing over a loaded weapon, and then, like a drowning man grabbing at the nearest object, my father tried to spin again. You don't get it, he barked. That money wasn't even hers. My blood ran cold. I turned to him. What money? He hesitated, but the crack had already widened. From the joint account, he muttered, years ago, before she got so fragile. I used it to keep Royce's business afloat. You think she would have understood? The officer stiffened. She didn't sign off on it, one asked. My father hesitated. And that's when he said it, his final mistake. She never needed to know. I had access. It was easier that way. I didn't even speak. I couldn't, because I saw it now, how deep it all ran. The control, the lies. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just shouting and slaps. It was theft, fraud, manipulation at a financial level my mother never even knew to check. One officer spoke calmly into his radio, while the other moved to stand between me and my father. They knew now. Royce screamed again, but no one was listening anymore. Everything had shifted. The officers separated us. My father tried one last time to speak directly to me. You're throwing your own blood under the bus. I didn't even turn. Do you want to press charges? One officer asked me quietly. Yes, I said. I'm done being quiet. The words didn't feel brave. They felt necessary. As they led my father and Royce toward the front door, I stood still in the middle of the room. The chair where my mother had sat, where it all started tonight, was still a few inches pushed back from the table. A small thing, but somehow that was the moment I knew. That chair marked the last time she sat still through violence, and the first time I stood up to stop it. And now, the room around it felt suspended, like everything inside our house had paused to ask, what now? The door had barely clicked shut behind the officers, my father, and Royce when the silence took over. It wasn't just the absence of voices, it was the absence of fear. A heavy stillness settled into the air, like the walls were letting out a long, tired breath. I walked slowly back into the dining room. The table still looked like a moment frozen in time. Half-eaten plates, an overturned glass with red wine slowly spreading across the tablecloth, catching the light like dried blood. No one had cleared a thing. Why would they? Time hadn't really moved forward yet. In the kitchen, my mother sat at the island, both hands wrapped around a mug someone must have given her. One of the officers, maybe. She didn't drink from it, just held it. For warmth? For comfort? I didn't ask. I sat across from her but didn't say a word. She didn't either. We just existed in that space, in that quiet, knowing everything had changed, but unsure what came next. Eventually, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of the fridge humming. He used to laugh like that when we were young, she said, not looking at me. Not because he was happy, but because he knew he could get away with it. I didn't answer. I just nodded, because I understood. That kind of truth didn't need a reply. It needed to be heard, and left where it lay. The next few days passed in pieces. Slow-moving hours interrupted by phone calls from officers, updates from a lawyer who'd been recommended by someone in town. We ate what we could, slept when we could, though neither of us really rested. Some wounds don't throb right away. They wait until the adrenaline wears off. Late in the week, just after lunch, there was a knock on the front door. I opened it to find Clara, our old neighbor from the block where I grew up. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, but time hadn't changed her much. She still wore the same cardigan sweaters and smelled faintly of peppermint. "I heard," she said gently. "I wanted to bring this." She handed me a wrapped bundle, an old leather photo album scuffed at the corners. "Your mom gave this to me years ago," Clara said. "Told me to keep it safe, just in case." I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter. My mother's hands hovered over it before finally opening the cover. Inside were photos I hadn't seen in years. One caught my eye, me, Royce, and Mom on the front porch, long before things turned ugly. We were kids, smiling, for the camera at least. On the back of the photo, written in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "I hope they never become like him." That tore something open in me. Not anger, not even sadness. Just the realization of how long she'd been afraid. That evening, after dinner, I found myself drifting back into the dining room. The same chair, hers, was still pushed slightly away from the table, as if she'd just stood up and never quite returned. I didn't straighten it. Instead, I pulled a sticky note from my pocket and placed it gently on the seat. Here's where I stopped pretending. No drama, no speech, just truth. Quiet and real. A week later, we got word that formal charges had been filed. Financial fraud, domestic battery. Royce, too, charged with assault and obstruction. As expected, they both denied everything. Claimed I'd manipulated our mother, that I was out for revenge, mentally unstable, angry at the world. But it didn't matter. The evidence spoke louder. Some relatives sided with them. I heard from one uncle who called me poison. But then there were the quiet messages, texts from cousins I hadn't seen in years. One aunt sent a card that simply read, "I wish I had your courage when I was your age." Mom made her own decision too. She sold the house. I helped her move into a small, sunlit apartment near Austin. 1 bedroom, a little balcony, walking distance to a park. It wasn't big, but it was hers. One afternoon, when I dropped off groceries, I found her sitting by the window, a half-painted canvas in front of her. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled softly. "It's a dinner table," she said, pointing to the painting. "Only 1 chair." She didn't need to explain. It was her way of saying, I finally made room for myself. As for me, life didn't suddenly turn into some perfect version of peace. I still heard Royce's voice in my head sometimes, still flinched at certain memories. But I didn't carry their anger anymore. I didn't feel the urge to fix something that was never mine to repair. I didn't wish them well, but I also didn't wish them harm. I was free of it, finally. People sometimes ask, those who hear this story in parts over time, whether I regret it, whether I regret airing family business like dirty laundry. But here's the thing. The silence was already broken. I just stopped pretending it was music. So, I'll ask you something, if you're still with me. Have you ever been the only one to stand up in a family full of people sitting down? What did it cost you? And was it worth it? If this story sounds familiar, even just a little, tell me. I read every word, because not every scar fades, but some scars become signatures.